Fáilte, welcome to the Village Oak Tree. I'm your host, Terrance Ó Domhnaill. Thank you for joining me. As we come to the close of another year, according to the Roman calendar, I'm hearing more and more that people are suffering from burnout. A burnout caused by sensationalist news media that hits us every waking moment of our lives nowadays. We're tired of hearing about economies failing, hearing about thousands of people dying around the world in all manner of ways, and our government failing us every time we elect someone new to replace the feckless ones that failed us before. Maybe we should take a lesson from Bulgaria, where the people just protested large and loudly enough to oust their government. In the US, things are starting to reach a fever pitch in a lot of places. Gather around, sit you down somewhere comfortable for a bit, and let's talk about what's going on that may not be making any headlines where you are. To close out today's podcast, I have a satirical seasonal poem to read to you from one of my dearest friends. I've been talking about the economy in the US, to a lesser degree, the EU. And the EU is coming apart in a lot of ways the last few weeks. I'm bringing you more news of things affecting everyday people everywhere. To publish this, it's a couple of days before the major Christian holiday of Christmas. If I were callous, I would post this on my normal day of the week, but as it happens to be Christmas Eve this year, I'm showing my respect for believers in the West by posting a day early. The biggest thing people everywhere are most worried about this holiday season is the cost of living. Whether you live in the US, the UK, the EU, or anywhere else in the English speaking majority Christian world, the cost of living is becoming an all consuming kitchen table topic these days, as families of all society classes, from the middle class on down, struggle with paying their bills and putting enough food on the table to hold off the hunger pangs. I read and hear about it in almost every source of news these days and from all over the world. The only ones not worried about paying their bills are the high upper middle class to the mega wealthy. Top 10%, as some newscasters have told us over the last year or more. The US, the news doesn't bode well for the years ahead either. Financial experts I listen to or read about are all predicting in some fashion or another a global financial crash that will rival 2008, if not worse. I've talked about this before, so I won't belabor the point again. Oracle stock is down 50% right now and could go lower. Larry Ellison must be in full-on panic mode by now. Nvidia Corporation is sweating bullets because of the chip war going on with China. The whole U.S. tech industry is sitting on a fine wire because of China and the Trump tariffs. Then there's the fossil fuel industry. I found an article last week that talks about how all these LNG exports to the EU and other countries are driving up domestic energy prices. This should come as a little surprise because they don't care about us. Remember last week when I talked about home heating prices? This just adds to the misery regular people are feeling right now. We all know by now, or should anyway, how Trump strong-armed the EU, Japan, and South Korea into buying more LNG from American fossil fuel industry earlier this year. That decision is coming back to haunt the average American consumer now. Again, Trump could care less, as he's getting his kickbacks from the fossil fuel corporations for driving more sales their way, which is likely the main reason why Trump is going after the oil in South America, with Venezuela being the first victim. If he can steamroll Venezuela into capitulation, then Colombia will likely be next. And just because Trump is all about retribution for the slightest things, Mexico is for sure in his crosshairs. After that, we can expect him to go after any other Latin American country that dares to cross Trump. Brazil will be last because they are the largest country by both geography and their economy. Trump is already making security deals with smaller countries in order, smaller Latin American countries in order to be able to use their resources for the so-called war on drugs. But we can make a pretty good bet that it's more than that. Now, I don't expect much of this, if any, to happen in reality. First and foremost, the American people have no political appetite for another forever war. Trump can try, but he won't be allowed to just pick up the phone and call Admiral Bradley to start a bombing campaign, followed by a ground campaign into Venezuela, much less with anyone else down there. Once the first body bags and caskets start coming home, the outcry will be massive. Not that Trump gives a tinker's damn about what anyone thinks, but Congress and the courts could stop the admiral before it start something the U.S. can't finish in the next 3 years. Not to mention what's already starting up. World opinion for what he's doing against, going against him. A couple of the so-called allies have stopped sharing military intelligence with the Pentagon over these obvious war crimes. Russia and China are calling out for what it is, a near-naked power grab to enforce the old Monroe Doctrine, which states that the Western Hemisphere, to include all of the Americas, belongs to the United States out of their national security fears. The countries in Central and South America are having a say about that. They're setting up trade and security agreements with China and Russia, mostly China, and standing up to the U.S. as best they can. Maduro has already lodged a formal complaint with the UN. Not that Trump cares what the UN or the ICC says about his aggressions. With all that going on, I have taken to watching Professor John Mearsheimer lately, as he has been talking about how the countries in South America are working hard at shutting out the American fossil fuel corporations from stealing their oil, which they have been doing since the end of World War II, according to the professor. Coercing these countries into making trade deals that hugely favor the U.S. corporations and impoverishing these countries they're stealing from. This shouldn't surprise anyone. The Americans learned those tricks from their European cousins. The British Empire was famous for that world round in their day. So were the other lesser European colonizing nations. Look where they are today on the world's empire stage. Britain, France, Germany, and the Netherlands have all been sent back to second-string status these days as their former colonies rose up through the years and took their dignity and countries back from their former masters. A lot of those former colonies are still in a hot mess, such as Haiti and the African nations, but they're working hard at making things better for their people. At least the Africans are, anyway. Haiti still has a long way to go, and a few are willing to step in and truly help. The same could be said for other smaller former colonies in the West. Cuba has long been under the American thumb since the communists took over in the late 1950s. More so since the infamous Bay of Pigs affair that severely embarrassed the Americans in 1961. I would argue it was this debacle that set the stage for all the rest through the years since. Name one major war that the U.S. has won decisively since World War II. One could counter the desert with Desert Storm, but did we really? General Schwarzkopf was stopped short of completing the mission, and look what happened in 2003. Back in the U.S., Trump and his minions are working hard at making sure he never loses another election, ever. He's still going on about his loss in 2020. According to Chris Armitage, in one of his fabulous articles from last week, Trump and his hardcore MAGA political supporters are working hard at subverting the next national elections, called the midterms here in the U.S., so that only his people will win, no matter what the popular vote turns out to be. He's working to subvert the software and the electronic voting machines, intimidate voters in minor districts into staying away on election day, purge thousands from the registered state voting records, and so on. In the U.S., once we, the people, get past the upcoming cringeworthy State of the Union address to Congress coming up after the holidays, we can expect the fight for voting supremacy to really take off in earnest. If Trump's latest nationwide address is any indicator of what to expect, it may be a real doozy. I read a couple of articles last weekend warning us that just because we haven't heard much from Trump's pet paramilitaries lately, we may hear from them more in 2026 and the lead up to Election Day in next November. Those guys dressed like the current ICE brigades, calling themselves Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, and so on, may emerge to help MAGA win the next state elections next November. Will Trump deploy armed ICE and CBP agents to predominantly Democrat voting districts around the country to round up suspected illegal immigrants? I've heard stories that this is what they want, to intimidate American citizens who may have darker skin into not voting, so the white majority voters can vote Republican with little opposition. Closer to home is something we've all talked about as it's been happening to other neighborhoods than our own. Actually witnessing an ICE raid into totally unexpected place. In this case, my own somewhat exclusive white majority subdivision. Last Thursday morning, as I was working in my home office, my wife came rushing to the office door, trying not to show herself in my office windows, whispering loudly, "Men with guns." As my wife's English is sometimes a little off, I looked at her to try and understand what she was trying to tell me. Then she pointed outside and said again, "Men with guns." I immediately jumped up to take a look, and sure enough, there was a young man standing on a back patio that faces my backyard, armed with an M4 military grade rifle, dressed in a semi-cami camouflage uniform, wearing a flak vest. He was looking at one of my neighbor's house, and when I looked a little closer, I could see local police and a couple of large SUVs parked in the street out in front of this house. So let me tell you a little bit about my subdivision and the people who've been living in this house that ICE raided. At least I think they're ICE anyway. I live in what's considered an exclusive neighborhood, part of a larger subdivision. Only senior citizens older than 55 years of age may buy a house in this neighborhood. It's predominantly white, mostly by design and not by law. I'm sure that back in the day when the houses here were being built to spec by new owners, they were being screened by the realtors for the color of their skins and their political allegiance to the party of the South, now called the GOP. That was nearly 25 years ago now, and there are laws against that. Not that any of that ever stopped people like this. There are more younger minority families within the greater subdivision here, but overall, the whole area is about 95% white. In 2025, there are only 2 non-white resident families in my little seniors neighborhood who own houses here. Well, 1.5, my wife being the half. There is a very nice family of Sikhs living in a house near mine that they bought in a cul-de-sac a couple of years ago. The house I mentioned before regarding what looked very much like an ICE raid last Thursday was being rented to a young Muslim family with very young children. They weren't bothersome, with the kids not misbehaving any more than any other kids playing outside would be anywhere else. That all changed last Thursday. I didn't walk over to mix with all the other looky-loos standing on the street out in front of this house, as I didn't want to leave my immigrant wife all alone. I also knew I didn't want to stand around looking like someone watching a reality TV show like all the rest. What we did see from our back windows were 2 heavily armed men, 2 large unmarked SUVs, and a local policeman. He probably wasn't by himself. And then they all whisked off, leaving the neighborhood oddly more quiet than normal. If you thought this can't happen to you, think again. Stories like this are being posted nearly every day now on social media from places normally thought of as distant from all the mayhem being committed in predominantly immigrant neighborhoods everywhere else. Your quiet, darker-skinned neighbors, whom you may have casually waved at out of kindness once in a while as you walk by their driveways, may end up being taken like this before you know it. Swept up in surprising ICE raid, with the children ending up being separated from their parents and all going to concentration camps of one kind or another far from their homes they were living in. From all the reporting I've been able to see this year, none of these so-called detention centers meet even the minimal standards mandated by international law for POWs, much less for the tens of thousands of people, most with no criminal records, who are being crammed into these facilities with no access to defense advocates or phones, forced to eat food that is spoiled a lot of the time, no or minimal access to medical care, and so on. I read something last Sunday that there are reported 65,000 plus immigrants now being held in concentration camps across the country, mostly in Louisiana and Texas. We treated POWs in the U.S. back in World War II better than this, at least the Germans anyway. The Japanese Americans, not so much from what I read, and the Italians were okay after Mussolini was removed. In a story I read in USA Today last weekend, the color of your skin isn't enough to keep you out of these camps. I read about a Lithuanian woman whom they detained 11 months ago, who was still in a Louisiana detention camp waiting for deportation back to Lithuania. She was given a deportation order back in August, but because of some vague excuse, ICE won't let her go home. She even volunteered to self-deport, but they still won't let her go. In case anyone asks, She is half Russian, speaks fluent Russian, and is whiter than I am. Maybe her extended punishment has something to do with the fact that MAGA Americans generally hate Russians. How many thousands of other people are being treated like criminals without due process in these detention camps? This young woman and her American boyfriend have nearly exhausted all their savings, and immigration lawyers and even the lawyers are scratching their heads over why they won't let her self-deport. I argue that this should be considered cruel and unusual punishment for what used to be a minor immigration offense. And they wonder why international tourism is way down, as in nearly non-existent now. But then we said the same thing about parents being forcibly separated from their children at the southern border back in Trump's first term. We see how much our outrage has affected anything they're doing. U.S. corporations are now telling their H-1B visa workers to not leave the country while they're still under contract, as they will likely be refused re-entry or detained when they come back. This is just a small tidbit. There is a small tidbit of resistance news I read about last weekend. Starting in LA and now happening in Chicago and showing up in other cities where ICE has gone beyond the pale, activists have come up with a relatively peaceful way to seriously annoy the ICE soldiers. By finding out what hotels they're bivouacked in and showing up to make so much noise from the street outside to keep them awake all night. According to the article, they've actually forced ICE squads from their hotel rooms with this tactic. Sucks to be an ICE soldier these days, especially those recent recruits who can't pass a PT test or were given minimal classroom training before told to hit the streets. Keep it up, people. These are the kind of tactics that will eventually cause attrition in the ranks as they suffer from severe sleep deprivation and harassment everywhere they go. I bet these idiots didn't sign up for any of that, or like some military recruits I dealt with during past wars, they failed to read the fine print in their contracts that told them they might endure some hardships while attempting to carry out their assigned duties. To add more fear to everyone's holiday cooking pot this week, we can add that the U.S. power grid looks like it's starting to fail more frequently in more places, with more mass power outages to come in the near future. I read two stories last Sunday. Although seemingly unrelated, they are pointing to an ever-increasing problem that few are noticing, other than through disjointed news stories here and there. More mass power outages occurring more frequently across the country. The first story I have is from San Francisco. And a journalist is more concerned about the Waymo self-driving taxi stopping in the middle of the streets than the cause of the power outage. If it were me, I would want to know why the grid went down in the first place. I mean, 130,000 homes suddenly going dark? I think that's a little more important than a bunch of driverless taxis, don't you think? In Colorado, there is another story about a large power outage that disrupted electricity for the country's atomic clocks. It was only by a few millionths of a second. But for these clocks that so much of the country's technology depends on to be exactly right, this is a wake-up call. What's going to happen when all these data centers really start dragging down the aging electrical grid in the U.S., as so many reporters have talked about? How many mass power outages can we expect over the next few years as Trump and his associates loot the country? What about the chaos that prolonged power outages will cause? Are you prepared to suffer a loss of electricity for days and weeks or more? With ever-rising energy bills hitting consumers more and more, are we getting what we were paying for? It's beginning to look like not. As Chris Armitage so aptly wrote in his Monday piece, it's time we the people started making these elected politicians squirm and sweat at night in order to bring back our decent standard of living and democracy. I want to wish everyone a happy solstice or a Merry Christmas, depending on your religious beliefs. I celebrated the longest night last Sunday, which is the extent of my seasonal celebrations. I respect those who want to celebrate Christmas in whatever fashion they wish. I sent gift cards to my grandchildren because the magic of St. Nicholas is always with us, no matter what your faith. I'll forego the advert this week because it's so close to the holidays. And I want to read this satirical holiday poem written by my good friend Bruce Coulter that I think perfectly sums up Washington politics as we close out the year. Sláinte. So let me bring this poem up here for you guys, and I'm going to read it here. 'Twas the night before a colossal document dump, a political satire featuring a cast of hacks and redacted files by Bruce Coulter. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house no speaker walked the halls as he hid like a mouse. The lawmakers had scattered for a holiday beer, and one odd commotion refused to disappear. Deep in a basement marked archives, beware. A stack of old files sat on a chair. The label read Epstein in handwriting dire, and the rumor mill sparked like raging fire. Donald Trump strode in with a confident grin, declaring, "These papers are nothing. Let's begin." He dusted them off with a flourish and a flare. "Why is everyone acting like there's something there?" Chuck Schumer arrived in a scarf and a frown, saying all this nonsense thanks to a clown. He peered at the folders with cautious disdain. If his name was there, he'd set it aflame. Mike Johnson rushed in with a binder of rules, shouting, "Handle with care. Will not look like tools." He flipped through the pages with trembling hands while waiting for his ringmaster's demands. Pam Bondi rushed in, ready to please, saying, "Relax, boys. We can make this cease." She sorted her folders with holiday calm, displaying fall folders that held no bombs. They gathered around in a DC circle jerk. Trump couldn't help but smile and smirk. Page after page was a baffling sight. Receipts for dry cleaning, a canceled flight, a dated menu that smelled like old glue, and a doodle of something that was absolutely untrue. Schumer blinked twice. "Is this some kind of joke?" Johnson said, "Talk about blowing smoke." Bondi laughed softly. "Well, this is a twist." The nation expected a scandalous list. Trump shrugged and said, "See, I told you, it's fine. These files are as boring as government wine." He stared at Johnson, who still had no spine, uttering, "This case is closed. I don't need to resign." They left the basement in holiday cheer, relieved that the files were nothing severe. As they departed into the cold night, the archive's door creaked with prankish delight. For tucked in the corner, unseen in the gloom, a lonely sealed envelope waited near a broom. Its label read simply, "Open next year." The cliffhanger wrapped in political fear, and I heard them exclaim as they vanished from sight, "There's nothing to see here, and to all a good night." That's got to be the best holiday poem that I have read in a very, very long time. I will tell you, that one I think is going to go a long way. I hope it becomes a classic. Gorma Haggett, thank you for watching and listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed it. You'll return again to listen to me offer a voice to what a lot of people are thinking these days. As I say goodbye this week, I want to wish everyone Nola Sean Adua. Merry Christmas in Irish. Shlongo Foil.